Most people think of World War II food shortages in terms of ration books, black markets, and government-issued substitutes. What's less often discussed is how across occupied Europe and parts of Asia, food itself became evidence. Certain items weren't just scarce, they were dangerous to possess. Families didn't simply run out of food, they actively hid it, concealed it, disguised it, and in some cases buried it, because discovery could mean confiscation, punishment, or worse. Before we get into those details, and if you value serious, source-driven history that looks at survival as a system rather than a slogan, subscribe to the Survival Record. This channel exists for people who want depth, not simplifications. What follows isn't a list of curiosities, it's an examination of how ordinary households adapted when food became both lifeline and liability. Occupation turned food into a strategic asset long before civilians realized it. Occupying forces understood very early that, well, controlling food meant controlling populations. In Nazi-occupied Europe, requisitioning wasn't limited to industrial production or fuel. Agricultural output was systematically redirected to feed the German war economy. In Eastern Europe, this policy was explicit and, honestly, quite brutal. In Western Europe, it was bureaucratic and incremental, but no less effective. Civilians learned that food inventories could be inspected, homes searched, and supplies seized with legal justification. What people chose to hide says a great deal about what occupying authorities valued, and what they feared civilians retaining. Grain and flour were hidden because, well, they represented autonomy, not just calories. Wheat, rye, and other grains were foundational to daily survival, but more importantly, they allowed families to decide how and when to eat. Flour could be baked, traded, stretched, or even fermented. Occupying forces prioritized grain seizure because it fed armies and stabilized supply chains. In response, civilians hid sacks of grain under floorboards inside double walls or buried in sealed containers. In rural Poland, Ukraine, and parts of France, grain caches were divided into small quantities to reduce loss if discovered. This practice later influenced Cold War-era civil defense planning, which, emphasized distributed storage over centralized stockpiles. Animal fats were concealed because, honestly, they just could not be replaced. Butter, lard, and rendered animal fat were among the most aggressively confiscated foods. Unlike vegetables, fats couldn't be grown back quickly. They were essential for cooking, nutrition, and labor endurance. German occupation authorities frequently imposed fat quotas, especially in dairy regions. Families responded by clarifying butter into shelf-stable forms, hiding it in ceramic crocks disguised as waste containers, or mixing it with less desirable substances to mask its value. The survival lesson here is, well, pretty stark. Non-renewable household resources attract attention first, and preservation methods often evolve under pressure rather than abundance. Dried and cured meats became liabilities because, honestly, they implied preparation. Salted pork, smoked sausages, and cured hams weren't just food. They signaled foresight. Occupying forces, often interpreted preserved meat as evidence of hoarding or black market activity. In France and the Netherlands, households dismantled visible curing setups and hid meat inside false ceilings or communal hiding spaces shared among neighbors. Some families intentionally undercured meat so it appeared spoiled, only to retrieve usable portions later. This adaptive degradation, well, it reflects a recurring wartime pattern. Civilians deliberately reduced efficiency to reduce detectability, a principle that is honestly still relevant in modern low-profile survival strategies. Root vegetables were buried twice, once for storage and once for secrecy. Potatoes, turnips and beets were, officially tolerated but unofficially seized when shortages worsened. Families often maintained decoy storage areas while concealing real reserves deeper underground or in non-obvious locations like churchyards or forest edges. In the Netherlands during the hunger winter, these hidden caches became absolutely critical when official rations collapsed. The dual storage method, visible compliance paired with hidden redundancy, would later appear in resistance logistics and post-war emergency planning models. Honey was hidden because it replaced multiple rationed goods at once. Honey functioned as sugar, preservative, medicine, and morale booster. Because sugar was tightly rationed, honey drew scrutiny. Families hid honey in sealed bottles labeled as lamp oil or even industrial lubricant. Its concealment reflects an overlooked aspect of survival. Multifunctional resources are more likely to be targeted, making discretion just as important as, acquisition. Cheese was concealed because it condensed time and labor. Hard cheeses represented months of milk and careful aging. In alpine regions and occupied Italy, cheese wheels were hidden in caves, submerged in water, or even reclassified as animal feed. Occupying forces understood cheese as a transport-efficient protein source, which made it valuable militarily. Civilians, on the other hand, understood it as stored labor. This tension between logistical efficiency and household survival, it actually mirrors later military supply doctrines that prioritize caloric density and shelf stability. Legumes were hidden quietly because, they were easy to overlook and easy to live on. Beans, lentils and peas didn't attract immediate attention, but honestly, they sustained populations when meat disappeared. Because they were dry, compact and, culturally undervalued by occupying soldiers, they were often hidden in plain sight. Families stored them in furniture, mattresses, and even, children's toys. Legumes highlight a counterintuitive survival truth. Foods that are nutritionally critical but culturally dismissed can actually become the backbone of endurance under occupation. Fruit preserves were hidden because they carried memory as well as nutrition. Jams, compotes, and canned fruit were often seized not for necessity but, for morale. Soldiers consumed them as luxury items. Families hid preserves in walls, under stairs, or even disguised them as cleaning supplies. These foods really mattered psychologically. They represented continuity with pre-war life. Modern disaster research consistently shows that, familiar foods really do improve resilience. A lesson that was, learned quite painfully during occupation. Alcoholic fermentations were often concealed because, honestly, they bypassed the official ration systems. Cider, wine, and homemade spirits were technically regulated, but actually they were widely produced. Occupiers feared alcohol not only as a resource, but also as a social catalyst. Hidden fermentations were common, with containers disguised as fuel or waste. Alcohol doubled as disinfectant, trade good, and stress relief. Its concealment illustrates how unofficial systems emerge when formal ones fail, shaping black market economies that outlast conflicts. What families hid reveals how survival knowledge actually evolves. These foods weren't chosen randomly. They were selected based on renewability, detectability, labor investment, and cultural value. Occupation forced civilians to think like logisticians, preservationists, and risk analysts. Many post-war civil defense manuals quietly incorporated these lessons, emphasizing redundancy, concealment, and adaptability over stockpiling alone. Remembering these stories matters because they correct a common misconception. Survival under occupation wasn't about heroics or luck. It was about systems, quiet decisions, and understanding what power targets first. If you value this kind of analysis, calm, factual, and grounded in real human experience, subscribe to the Survival Record and share this video with others who want more than surface-level history. These lessons were paid for dearly. They deserve to be understood.